Hello and welcome. In this video we will be discussing about the very important topic which is called as sacred complex and nature man spirit. As far as these topics are concerned, it comes under paper 2. Here we will understand that what basically a sacred complex and nature man spirit complex mean. This is very important topic as far as UPSC is concerned and the optional paper is concerned, because this is one of the highest weighted topic from paper 2, and hence it requires a special attention and an answer to this question. So the sacred complex is also called as religious center, and a question can come on the significance of study of religious center, studies of religious center. So you have to understand that religious center, it means nothing but a sacred complex. And what does nature and man spirit complex mean is what we will study in the later part of this video. Okay, so the concept of sacred complex was first developed by LP Vidyarthi. We are doing this topic because in the last video we did diffusionism, where we met American school, where we found Kroeber and his rise and fall of civilization, where he talks about a concept which was forwarded by Robert Redfield. Robert Redfield took the concept of rise and fall of civilization in the form of greater tradition and little tradition, and this concept was used in Indian context by LP Vidyarthi, and hence we are doing the topic called as sacred complex, and I hope you got the context that why we are doing LP Vidyarthi here. So the concept of sacred complex was developed by LP Vidyarthi. LP Vidyarthi developed the concept of sacred complex under the context of Robert Redfield's context, who pioneered the civilization school in anthropology. So Robert Redfield, he was a pioneer in civilization school of anthropology, who was pioneer in the civilization school of anthropology. So sacred complex consists of certain important things which include sacred geography. Sacred complex includes sacred geography, then sacred specialist, and sacred performance. Sacred geography means a place, area. For example, Tirupati Balaji, Gaya complex, Bodh Gaya, right? Specialist, it means Pandit, Maulavi, and various types of Bhadji, for example, that will come under sacred specialist. Performances are basically rites and rituals. So rites and rituals will come under sacred performance. So this is the basic about sacred complex. So the concept of sacred complex was given by LP Vidyarthi in Indian context, which was basically a concept in the context of Robert Redfield's greater tradition and little tradition. Robert Redfield was pioneer in the civilization school of anthropology. The sacred complex is further divided into three, or is it not divided, basically it consists of three, that is sacred geography, sacred specialist, and sacred performance. In the sacred geography we have given this particular things. Now Redfield has given an hypothesis. So Robert Redfield postulated that center of reference must be at the center of diffusion. So Redfield says that if this is a complex, so the center of reference, it has to be somewhere at the center, and then there will be something at the periphery. So okay. Second is that from where the cultural interaction went on. In order to study the hypothesis, LP Vidyarthi studied the sacred complex of Gaya. So LP Vidyarthi, he studied the sacred complex of Gaya. So LP Vidyarthi, he studied the sacred complex of Gaya. The concept of sacred complex are basically the center of civilization where pilgrims from the different regions of country and different level of culture interact. So basically this sacred complex is a region or area where the different pilgrims and different cultures interact. So this sacred complex is basically an area where pilgrims or different culture, they basically interacts with each other. Now in the concept which is sacred complex, which was put forth by LP Vidyarthi in the book Sacred Complex of Gaya. See, as far as this concept is important, we also have to understand, remember the name of book which was given by LP Vidyarthi, written by LP Vidyarthi. It is the Sacred Complex of Hindu Gaya. Sacred Complex of Hindu Gaya. So this was basically the name of book which was written by LP Vidyarthi. In this concept, this sacred complex of Hindu Gaya, it was basically influenced by Chicago School of Anthropology, which was influenced by Chicago School of Anthropology. Chicago School of Anthropology, right? And the cultural role of the cities came to be studied. So this was the first time when the role of cities under Chicago School of Anthropology came under prominence or studies. Basically it was done on the wider scale. Now they limited it to a study of cities, and that is how LP Vidyarthi took it, and he used this concept on Gaya, that is Bodh Gaya in Bihar. This was sacred complex. Now the three components or the three parts from which this sacred complex are basically consist of is sacred geography, sacred performance, and sacred specialist. So first is sacred geography. Sacred geography basically means that the entire geography which has this sacred complex, we'll call it as sacred geography. In the Indian context, or in the sacred complex of Hindu Gaya, in this concept, the entire geography of this particular place called as Gaya. Right, so entire geography of Gaya comes under sacred geography. Now this sacredness, it varies from place to place and from distance also. If it is for example, river, stones, temples, trees, buildings, this everything will come under sacred geography. But now this thing called as secularization of the sacred geography is increasing. When this secularization is increasing of the sacred zone, this comes basically restaurants, parks, food stalls, etc. This will come under the secular geography. So now this secularization have decreased the area of sacred geography, and sacred geography basically reflect the continuity. This sacred geography basically reflects the continuity between greater tradition and little tradition. Next is sacred performance. Okay, so in sacred performances, we'll also write down. See, there are certain rites and rituals which one has to do, but these performances cannot be completed without specialist, and hence sacred specialist. Okay, there are certain rites and rituals, for example, pindan, puja, home, havan, gaya, shraddha, etc. So this will come under the certain rituals, that is performances. These performances are supervised by Gayawal Brahmins. So these performances are supervised by Gaya Brahmins. These performances are supervised by Gaya Brahmins. They are highly ritualistic and conservative. These Gaya Brahmins are basically the cultural specialists. These are conservative and highly orthodox. Now, these people, that is the Gaya Brahmins, they live a highly Sanskritized life. And they do not accept modern education, and they do not accept modern education. They do not accept the modern education. And these people, that is the Gaya Brahmins, they are called as the sacred specialist. There are other sacred specialists, for example, monks, priest, even the florist will come under the sacred specialist. Now within this universe there are always diffusion of Indian tradition, and when a person visits a sacred place, he carries back with him certain practices. So when A visits a place B and return back to place A, so here he'll take certain of his cultural traits to place B, and he will borrow certain cultural traits from place B to back his place, that is A. So this person will become a way of diffusion, or this person will be a medium of diffusion. So that person becomes a medium of diffusion, where he carries certain part of little tradition to the great tradition, and he gets back certain aspect of greater tradition back to the little tradition. Now, this is how a common cultural consciousness develops. So basically, this helps in harmonizing. This helps in both universalization of the cultural traits of little tradition and parochialization of the cultural traits of greater tradition into little tradition. In this sacred complex, basically the cultural elements from great tradition are basically we say that they enters into the little tradition and they become parochialized. And when the sacred specialist visit little tradition for various purposes, some element of little tradition comes into the mainstream, that is the great tradition. We call it as universalization of the little traditions cultural trait. And there is a diagram. See, this is great tradition, this is little tradition. Now we haven't talked about the tribe, caste, continuum yet, but we will have video on this particular topic as well. So if this is greater tradition and this is little tradition, anything flows from greater tradition to little tradition, it will be parochialization, and anything from little tradition to greater tradition, when it will go, we'll call it as universalization. Okay, now taking lead from this Vidyarthi sacred complex of Hindu Gaya, a group of younger sociologists was attracted towards this new field of research, and Saraswati he's contributed in this field with his the Holy Circuit of Nimsal, the Holy Circuit of Nimsal, and the temple organization of Goa and Kashi. The temple organization of Goa and Kashi. Among the other contributions are Jhaz, the sacred complex of Ratanpur, the sacred complex of Ratanpur, and Mahapatras, the sacred complex of Lingaraj temple. Lingaraj temple, that will come under Mahapatras. Now, what is basically the function of the sacred complexes, right? So first, very important function of the sacred complex is that it is the center of civilization. Sacred complex is nothing but the center of civilization. Center of civilization. Second is they act as an agency of diffusion. They act as agency of diffusion. Third is that they serve to integrate the diverse culture. They integrates various cultural traits of different culture, and they basically try to harmonize, or they try to maintain the cultural continuity, or maintain the cultural continuity. Cultural continuity. See, this is important because the way we have written it, you will also frame your answer in that way, and you make your answers right that way. We have discussed various topics here. Now, who was basically Saraswati and his contribution is remaining. So we will make a separate video on contribution of Saraswati. As far as the function answer is concerned, you have to mention this as well as this in the answer. And if you can draw a diagram here, that will be a good. Now there are little topics such as sacred geography. So we will just have a basic discussion on this because we have talked about it, right? Sacred geography. But there is something we need to mention. See, the sacred geography is nothing but a concept of sacred complex, which was put forth by L.P. Vidyarthi in his book Sacred Complex of Hindu Gaya. And he defines sacred complex as a center of civilization where pilgrims from different regions of India and world reaches, and there is a cultural interaction. That is what we have written already. Next is there are three components of sacred complexes, which is sacred specialist, sacred geography, and sacred performances. Talking particularly about the sacred geography, L.P. Vidyarthi analyzed the sacred geography in the ancient cultural village of Gaya in the Bihar, right? And he divided the entire space occupied by Gaya as Kshetra, and Kshetra is divided into simple parts which are shown below. So here is where it is shown. First he wrote the Kshetra. Kshetra is further divided into complex. Complex is divided into zones. Zones is divided into segment. Segments are divided into clusters. Clusters are divided into centers. So this is how the sacred geography completes. See, entire geography of Gaya is basically sacred. For example, sacred river, sacred trees, sacred buildings, both in terms of time and frame. So even if you go after 100 year in both Gaya, and basically Gaya is a place of worship still in that after 100 years, so you will see that the river, trees, stones, they will have their sacredness in them. But right now, as the secularization is increasing, the zone of sacred geography is reducing considerably in the form of restaurants, parks, etc. This sacred geography, the sacred geography is nothing but a link which provides continuity for the greater tradition and little tradition. So this is nothing but the sacred geography. As far as the contribution of Saraswati is concerned, we can do it here also. Okay. A simple question can become that contribution of Saraswati, and you will have to write. See, Saraswati basically have contributed a lot. Particularly, there is a contribution in to the concept of sacred complex in India, where he have given his studies in the form of the Holy Circuit of Nimsal and the temple organization of Goa and Kashi. So, the Holy Circuit of Nimsal and the the temple complex of Goa and Kashi. So this is his contribution regarding sacred complex. This is his contribution to sacred complex. Now he asked few questions. That is, Saraswati asked few questions that whether this Heterogeneous pilgrims, which interact with each other in sacred geography, share the same or common Brahminical concept of sacred or not. So basically, the people in sacred geography, when the different people of different cultures they come and interact with each other, and that particular place becomes a continuity of the greater tradition and little tradition. So are these people sharing the common Brahminical concept of sacred or not? So that was the first. Or so are they sharing the Brahminical concept of sacred or not? Second is that, do they interact fully or equally with the sacred phenomena? Do they interact, that is sacred object, do they interact fully or equally? Fully or equally. Third, does this does not basically seems to happening with the every Hindu places of pilgrims, and yet this serves an important part. Basically, this is not something which is common, right? This is uncommon, because you do not see this happening in every place, right? This you do not see this happening in every place. So hence his questions were legitimate. Now his works on sacred complexes. So he is of the view that concept of sacred is essentially based on man's desire to communicate with the spiritual world in order to attain moksha. So Saraswati says that the concept of sacredness is a result of man's desire to attain moksha, which is the final goal of anybody. So this is basically the moksha that we are talking about here. In this study, in the second, that is the temple complex of Goa and Kashi, particularly focusing on Kashi, he says that the sacred complex of Kashi may appear predominantly as a Brahmin concept, a Brahmin complex. It is indeed a complex of much bigger organization of the traditional known Indian civilization, where Brahminical temple of Vishveshwara. When he studies Kashi, basically, he says that this is not just limited to Brahminical concept of the sacred complex. You see, this is first Brahminical temple of Vishveshwara, and second is the non-Brahminical temple of Agyabir also exist, and the textually learned Karmakand and illiterate untouchable Domto conduct sacred performance together. So textually learned Karmakandi as well as illiterate untouchable Domto, they carried out sacred performance. So Karmakandi and Domto. Domto is untouchable and illiterate, whereas Karmakandi is literate, textually learned. So they perform sacred performances together. Sacred performance together. And a Nastic Brahmin also touches the feet of Avdut. And here the Nastic Brahmin also touches the foot of Avdut, who is supposed to eat carcasses. That is the remaining of the dead body. So this reminds that the pilgrims coming from different culture or tradition again and again, that they must not be too egoistic in upholding their own tradition as the superior most. So basically Saraswati is talking about here he talks about the Kashi, the example here that is of the sacredness. he talks about Kashi, that how people, they come and they share themselves, their sacredness, their sacred geography, specialist, everything, and they do not hold their culture, or they should probably not hold their culture as superior or inferior in front of anyone else. And that is what was said by LP Vidyarthi. Thank you for watching.